All right, guys, what's going on? It's Reed Orlando, aka Reed SPN, aka Reed Sports Personality News. Thank you guys for tuning into my last podcast. We got a decent amount of views. Like to keep that going and get to thousands of views, not just a couple, not 30, not 40, not 50. We need to get thousands. We got to get this going. So, anyways, this weekend was a very busy weekend for me. I was actually missed some of the fights this weekend, unfortunately. I rewatched most of them. I watched all the prelims on ESPN. And I was able to make the Robbie Lawler-Ben Askren fight and Kamaru Usman and Tyron Woodley fight. And in the main event, John Jones and Anthony Smith. I was able to see the last three fights that night. But let me just talk about the Men at War professional grappling event that I was working at. Shout out to Eugene Perez for letting me work this event and letting me just help out wherever I'm needed. Now, in the co-main event, we had a rematch between Frank Rosenthal versus Merlin Ramos. Merlin Ramos, Ricardo Almeida, BJJ guy. Frank Rosenthal is a Renzo Gracie guy. Part of the Danaher Death Squad, one of the best grapplers on planet Earth, no gi. Frank Rosenthal was able to get the win there. There was no submission, but he won just because of the more submission attempts, back takes, and things of those nature. So Frank Rosenthal won the rematch there. Big shout out to Frank Rosenthal. Shout out to Sonny Rosenthal, to his brother, who I actually went to high school with, and we were talking back and forth while that event was all going out. So shout out to Rockland County for sure on that one. Frank Rosenthal is an animal. And then the main event, we had Corey Anderson, the Corey Anderson, Overtime Anderson. He's currently ranked within the top 5 of the light heavyweight division right now. Absolute animal. Should be in talks for the next title contender for John Jones, in my opinion. I think maybe he should even get the shot next. But he was able to submit Diego Rivera. That was a good match. So overall, it was an interesting night of grappling. This was my first grappling event I went to. Mind you, I wrestled my entire life, so I've seen grappling, but not to this extent. It's just very interesting overall to watch these jiu-jitsu practitioners work and just how different it really is. They don't care if they get taken down. And there was also a kid there that was a pretty good wrestler. He actually wrestled at Oswego, which is my alumni school, in like 2008. So he was an older guy. And the guy that he was grappling against was just this skinny little kid. I think his name was Daniel Hernandez. And he's another Renzo Gracie guy. But he was just able to, it was just crazy to see how fluent he was off his back and how many submissions he was going for, and just how fast he was. I mean, the kid that he was grappling against really had no answers for it. So it just goes to show that wrestlers can definitely perform at a high level in these grappling events. But man, it's just crazy to see these jiu-jitsu guys roll. Just how flexible they are, how active they are, always looking to pass. All Renzo Gracie guys in general, but I was really impressed by that one. It was really just a wrestler versus a jiu-jitsu guy, and the jiu-jitsu guy won. So very interesting on that one. Now to get into the fights, guys. Let's get into the fights. Just doing my recap of the whole. Not the entire card because I missed some of them, but just the ones that I was able to see. Diego Sanchez versus Mickey Gall. I was wrong with that pick. I picked Mickey Gall to win, and Mickey Gall landed some decent shots when they were standing, but Diego looks super impressive. You can never count him out. He's now on a 2-fight winning streak, and he's a 17-year veteran in MMA. It's just very impressive to see how long he's been fighting at such a high level. It's really impressive, honestly. And the more you talk shit to Diego and the more you threaten him, the more ferocious he comes out, and the more he has to prove to the world that he is not going to lose that fight. And it was a phenomenal fight and a phenomenal performance by Diego, and honestly, he won the performance of the night. Once you got him on the ground, it was really just the Diego show. Diego controlled him. He was landing a lot of elbows from top guard. He really just took it to Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall is no slouch on the ground. He is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Diego is a black belt, however, and when it came to the grappling, Diego took over, and that's what got Diego the fight. He was just landing so many significant strikes from on top of Mickey Gall that it was really just an impressive performance from Diego there. So that was it for that fight. Just Diego still doing it. Out-conditioned him, and he really just out-grappled him, and overall, in any of the transitions, Diego got the better of him. So Diego Sanchez still doing the thing, so maybe these younger guys will stop talking shit to Diego and stop calling him out, because he is still a real threat, especially at welterweight, because these last couple of years he's been bouncing up. He even dropped as low as 145 pounds, which is featherweight, to lightweight. Diego just bounces all throughout every weight class in the UFC, pretty much, except for like Oh, he actually did fight at middleweight. He won the UFC Ultimate Fighter 1 at middleweight. So it's just impressive to see how good Diego is for this long. Now, in the next fight, Alejandro Perez versus Cody Stamann. Perez was on a 6-fight win streak before losing to Stamann, and Stamann was coming off that vicious submission against Aljamain Sterling. And it was an ugly fight for both of them. They really brought it to each other, and Stamann was able to edge out a decision there. Good fight for Stamann. Good to get him back on his feet. Stamann is definitely no joke in the in the bantamweight division. He really isn't. Stamann is no joke. Before getting submitted by Aljo, he was undefeated in the UFC, so definitely watch out for Cody Stamann within the next couple of weeks to see who they match him up with next, because he is healthy. Now, Misha Serkinov versus Johnny Walker. I mean, I said previous to the fight, I thought that Johnny Walker was going to knock him out in round 1, but I did think that his ground skills were going to get tested against Serkinov. He didn't even attempt a takedown, but there really wasn't enough time to. There was only it was a fight finished in 36 seconds by Walker. Walker timed that flying knee perfect, and really the big takeaway from Johnny Walker is his timing. He had that phenomenal spinning back fist knockout a month ago against Justin Ledet, and his timing is really impeccable. He just knows when to land those explosive strikes at the right minute. He waits for a little bit of an opportunity, a little bit of a window, then boom, explodes, and he's able to knock you out. So one thing we could say about Johnny Walker is that he is a knockout artist. He now has 14 knockouts/TKOs with 2 submissions, 3 knockouts within the first round. And his last 2 wins have been knockouts in the first round. He had 3 knockouts in the UFC within the first round. It's just really impressive what Johnny Walker's been able to do. He is a serious threat in the light heavyweight division. Hopefully he doesn't need surgery on his shoulder, because he did that stupid worm shit that he does. Mind you, it's like kind of his, I don't know, not his catchphrase, but his signature move after the fight. And he usually does well on the worm, but the way he landed right on his right shoulder, I believe, and it popped out, and you could tell he was wincing in pain. And after the fight, he said to Joe Rogan that he did pop his shoulder out after saying, "Hello, Mickey Mouse." I don't know why he said that, but Johnny Walker's a funny guy. He's a very loose guy. I really like his personality. He's definitely going to be a star within the next year or so. I think he's already at that star level just because of the new ESPN era with the UFC, that a lot of these mainstream fans are now being able to see Johnny Walker's highlight knockouts. That spinning back fist knockout against Justin Ledet was played on repeat on ESPN. It was actually in the ESPN's top 10 for that week. I think it was number 2, if I'm not mistaken. So ESPN deal overall has just been great for the sport. More exposure overall. And I'm really starting to like it, because now these younger, hotter prospects like Johnny Walker are starting to get recognition in the mainstream audience. So definitely a big win for Johnny Walker. I hope he doesn't have any issues with his labrum, because the thing with shoulder injuries, and I've had numerous shoulder injuries in both of my shoulders. I have something called loose joint syndrome, so in grappling and any sort of thing like that, my shoulders will fly out once in a while. It'll go back in, but it still hurts like a bitch, and I get a bone bruise and whatnot, and I actually have a torn labrum, so that could be the cause of why my shoulders have been dislocated, along with having loose joints. But I just hope that Johnny Walker's shoulders are all right, because shoulder injuries are as bad as knees. They just linger, and they can go on forever. So I hope Johnny Walker doesn't need surgery. I know they said that they're getting it checked out and that he might need surgery. He might be out 4 weeks if it's a minor shoulder surgery, but I'm hoping it's not. I hope everything's right with Johnny Walker, because he is on a roll right now. I think the next fight maybe to make would be him versus Glover, since Glover did beat Misha Serkinov as well. Or Iancu Taliba, because Iancu Taliba was supposed to fight Glover originally, and Iancu Taliba is still a big name in the light heavyweight divisions. You can't give him a top 5 opponent right now. Maybe you can give him a Jimmy Manoa, who's at number 10 right now, but you can't give him a top 5 opponent right now. We'll see how Dominic Reyes. And who is Dominic Reyes fighting right now? Oh, I think it's OSP Dominic Reyes is fighting next. So no, he beat him. So I don't know who Dominic Reyes is fighting. We'll see what's going on with that. But I expect him to get like a top 10 opponent, maybe a Jimmy Manoa, Iancu Taliba, Glover Teixeira, someone in that range to build him up. Not slowly, but build him up and put him against more, I don't know, more favorable matchups for him, because I really think that Johnny Walker is going to be a superstar in the UFC, if you haven't been able to tell by his last 3 performances in the octagon. So Johnny Walker, absolute stud, absolute animal, phenomenal name. He's got to lay off on the dance moves, but besides that, he is the real deal. Now, Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Jeremy Stephens. Now, it was a good fight. I thought that Zabit looked good, and one of the things that stands out to me the most about Zabit is just his distance control and his timing and his speed. His kicks are so fast. I mean, He almost landed a spinning 360 kick on Jeremy Stevens. I don't even know if that's the right name for it, but he's so good, Zabit, everywhere. Jeremy Stevens did take it to him in the third round. Jeremy Stevens even hit him with a couple of good shots, and Zabit didn't seem phased. He seemed to bite down on his mouthpiece even more and look to engage inside the pocket. But Zabit, super well-rounded, as always. Some people I could see were a little bit disappointed in his performance. I'm not. He looked dominant against a guy who's top 6 in the world right now, in Jeremy Stevens. So it was a tough matchup for Zabit. I think it was his first real matchup in the featherweight division. So I think that now it's really off to the races for Zabit. I would like to see him and Yair Rodriguez fight in a 5-round fight to see how, well, we know how Yair can do in a 5-round fight, which we saw against the Korean zombie, Chan Sung Jung. But I would like to see Zabit in a 5-round fight, so maybe they'll get a fight night going for those two. Two of the youngest stars in that division right now, and they've been looking phenomenal in their last couple of fights, and I think it only makes sense that these two finally meet on their collision course against each other. So let's see if that happens. But besides that, pretty impressive win for Zabit, even though Jeremy Stevens did put it on him in the third round. And he even landed some pretty decent takedowns, Zabit. Zabit is just so well-rounded everywhere, and his wrestling is overrated, honestly. You really have to watch out for everything that Zabit throws. You never know what he's going to do. He always keeps you guessing, and that's what makes Zabit so great. Now for the main card. Cody Garbrandt versus Pedro Munoz. Like I was saying in the pre-fight podcast, I was just saying that when Cody gets someone clipped, he just keeps coming in, and he's just not disciplined when he gets someone hurt. He just doesn't sit on the outside. He's not patient. He just goes full-fledged in, and it got him in trouble here against Pedro Munoz. Now, Pedro Munoz, I said that Cody had more technical striking, but Munoz does have power. And mind you, Cody did get headbutted, and he said he saw red. That's why he kept going forward on Pedro Munoz, and that's why he was being so aggressive in that last exchange there, which eventually led to him getting knocked out. But Pedro Munoz knocked him out. I think that was a huge win for Pedro Munoz. I mean, next, maybe we'll get him against Aljamain Sterling, even though Aljo did call out Cody Garbrandt after the fight, which I thought was weird after a loss. And I think maybe Cody now should fight Jimmy Rivera since he's coming off a loss. So I think that that's what we're looking at next for the bantamweight division. I think Cody versus Jimmy Rivera and Aljo versus Munoz. I mean, those two fights make sense. But yeah, a little disappointed. I can't say I'm disappointed in the fighter. He left it all out there. But you know what? Cody's just got to be more patient because he really is that good. I don't think this really sets Cody back as much as other people like to think. But it does set him back a little bit, and it's going to take him a couple fights to try to get into that title contention again. And if TJ still has the belt by the end of the year, he's not getting it. So he's got to get some really significant wins. And he could definitely start by fighting a guy in Jimmy Rivera and getting a win there. But, man, definitely disappointment from Cody. I really thought that he was going to get the win here. But, again, just got too aggressive. This is what's happened his last 3 fights. He just got knocked out in those exchanges when he left himself open and overextended too much. Big win there for Pedro Munoz. Shout out to Pedro Munoz. That was very impressive. Now, Wiley Zhang versus Tisha Torres. I kind of caught a little of this on my phone streaming, but I did say, is it Wiley Zhang or Zhang Wiley? I think it's Zhang Wiley. That's what they were calling her on the UFC, but her Instagram is Wiley Zhang. But that was a big win over number 6 Tisha Torres right now. She is the face of Chinese MMA. Like I was saying, she's just so well-rounded. She's very unpredictable on what she's going to throw. She uses those side kicks to control distance. And overall, she's just a really good fighter. I saw the day prior to her weigh-in, she ran like 7 miles on incline. She's just a very determined and motivated fighter. And now it's really off to the races for her. That honeymoon phase for her to get into the UFC and to fight some of these, I'd say some of these fighters that are not within the top 10. Now she just had her first real test against Tisha Torres, and she passed that test with flying colors. So she looked really good. Very impressed by Wiley Zhang. She is the face of Chinese MMA, and she's one of the most special fighters in the UFC, so you have to watch out for Wiley Zhang, or Zhang Wiley, in that strawweight division. I don't know necessarily what's next for her. Maybe they'll match her up with Joanna, or maybe they'll match her up with, well, no, they can't do that either. So let's say Joanna for now. That would be a very fun fight. I would really look forward to seeing that one. Might not even happen, but that's a fight that I would really like to see. Two very different strikers, but yet two very technical fighters. So I'd be curious to see how that plays out. Now, Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler. Let's just start off by saying that Robbie Lawler looked phenomenal. He was in phenomenal shape. You could see his veins popping out of his arm. I thought he really was a couple of seconds away from finishing Askren, but Askren's got a chin on him, and he could take a fucking shot. That's one thing that really stood out to me about Ben Askren, is he was able to take some punishment from Robbie Lawler. That was the first time in his entire career, besides the Luis Santos fight, that we really saw him in trouble. And he passed that test. And let me just say this. Robbie Lawler, that fireman's carry was beautiful. Ben Askren was not expecting that. He really lifted him off the ground with that one. I don't think Robbie's stock dropped at all in this one. But I will say this, that bulldog choke, at the time, I said that the fight should have been stopped. Now, it was a blood choke. He had him in a bulldog choke. And mind you, they're usually not the most common submissions in the UFC, but if you get it tight, like when Carlos Newton fought Pat Miletich, you can really crank that and you can really put someone out unconscious. And Ben Askren has one of the best grips in MMA, one of the best grips in the world, in all honesty. You ever see him crush those two watermelons with his body lock? But anyways, I thought that Robbie did go limp. I really did think he went limp, even though you saw after the fight that he did give the thumbs up. He did go limp, and I'll tell you what, there might not have been controversy if Ben Askren had that for 10 to 15 more seconds, because you know what, I think he would have went out from that. Robbie did go limp. It wasn't a normal defense for a choke. You're usually trying to fight the arms. He dropped his hand down. So I didn't think it was that horrible a call on Herb Dean. Robbie Lawler, after the fight, was upset for a second, then was like, fuck it. So, I don't know. That's a little bit of a controversial one, but I will say this. Overall, besides that, Ben Askren won that fight. One of my friends, Kevin, who I've had on the podcast before, he was saying, Askren whooped his ass. I was like, were we watching the same fight? Because honestly, I didn't see Askren whoop his ass. I saw Askren get a better of some of the grappling exchanges, and he readjusted and was able to get to that position where he had his head in his arms for that choke, for that bulldog. But Askren really got the shit kicked out of him in this one. That was a rough fight for Ben Askren. I mean, his face is still destroyed from it. Robbie Lawler, he's still an animal. He's still doing it. But Ben Askren, I'd be curious to see who he fights next, because that was a really interesting fight against him and Robbie Lawler. I think that might have been his toughest test. Well, I definitely know it was his toughest test so far, but it might be his toughest test in the UFC overall. We'll see who he fights next and how that plays out and whatnot. But that was a really interesting fight. Now, Ben Askren and Robbie Lawler, I know Dana White was saying that he wants to get that one going again for a rematch, but why do they need to fight again? Ben Askren didn't even really want to fight him in the first place. He called everyone else out in that division but Robbie Lawler. So we'll see what happens with that. I do know that they're flying out Ben Askren to London to see how Jorge Masvidal and Darren Till plays out. Askren versus Till would be a fun fight. Very interesting fight if Darren Till's able to win, or a fight against Jorge Masvidal would be very interesting. It all really depends on who wins that fight, but the real thing there is if Darren Till's able to beat Jorge Masvidal, is how's he going to deal with Askren's wrestling? He did stuff a bunch of takedowns from Woodley, but there's levels to this shit, and Ben Askren is that next level. He is one of the best grapplers on planet Earth, like I said in my podcast. Him, Tatiana Suarez, and Khabib Nurmagomedov are the three best grapplers in the world in the UFC. So be curious to see how that plays out. Darren Till did talk shit to him after the fight. Now, the co-main event, Kamaru Usman versus Tyron Woodley. That was let me just go out and say that was one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen in a title fight, up there with Henry Cejudo versus Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo versus TJ. But I really thought that Kamaru Usman, I thought that this fight was going to play out differently, because I just thought that Woodley was going to be able to stuff a lot of Usman's takedowns, and that is a big part of his game, is getting you up against the cage and taking you down and imposing his will on you, landing a couple of shots when he's on top of you. And Usman implemented his game plan perfectly. Usually Woodley sets up traps when he's up against the cage, but that did not happen. I mean, he wasn't even able to land that right hand once, at least effectively. Usman just took him down. He imposed his will on him, got him down against the floor, and was pounding on him the whole night, and he landed some really nice clinch elbows. I mean, his kickboxing looked great. Kamaru Usman looked fucking phenomenal in that fight. And honestly, Colby Covington, keep talking shit, because you're not going to like what's next for you. I think Kamaru Usman's going to really smash him. He smashed Tyron Woodley, which I didn't think I'd ever see that. I thought that Tyron Woodley was up there with the greatest welterweights of all time, if not the greatest welterweight of all time, if he was able to pass this test. And Usman just looked so fucking good everywhere. His striking, his conditioning. I mean, he's a cardio machine. For a guy that's that big and that has that much muscle mass, it's really impressive, the performance he was able to put on. I mean, Usually you don't see guys that big with that much muscle mass have the cardiovascular, I guess, tendencies that Usman does. I mean, he took him down, and it was the Usman show. He kept putting pressure on him. He kept landing strikes, taking him down. He mixed it up so well, and Woodley really had no answers for him. Respect to Woodley for his post-fight press conference and for really saying that you were the better man this night. You did beat me. I don't know why everyone hates Tyron Woodley. I like the guy. He's a good guy. It's always him versus the world, and I get why some people don't like that. But he is one of the greatest welterweight champions of all time. I'd put him number 2, actually, in terms of the greatest welterweight champions of all time, or 3 behind Matt Hughes. But I think that a prime Tyron Woodley would smash a prime Matt Hughes. So. We'll see what's next for Woodley. It's going to be tough for him to climb back up the ladder to get a title shot again. Because of when he was champion, he turned down a lot of fights, and there was a lot of bullshit with him as champion, which is also why people don't like him. But he was injured and whatnot. So I don't know. I don't know what's next for Woodley, but I will say this: Usman versus Colby is a shit matchup for Colby. Colby does everything to a lesser extent as Usman does. He's just not as good as Usman, in my personal opinion. I just think that Colby's main game is to shoot, take you down, and to try to ground and pound you. His striking's not horrible, but it's certainly not as good as Usman's. He doesn't have the power that Usman has, and I think Usman could even take him down. Usman is no joke. Definitely excited for him to see who he fight. Well, he's going to fight Colby next. I'm excited for that fight, for the build-up of it. But I'll tell you what, I think he's going to smash Colby. And there was even almost a fight in the casino after the fight, which I said to my friend Dylan, I said, these motherfuckers are going to fight after this all, after the night's over in the casino. Something's going to happen to Colby. And this guy fucking took his phone out and recorded the whole thing, Colby. I'm just not that big of a fan of him. I think he comes off like a douche. I think that he's also part of the reason what's wrong with this sport. I'm not into shit talk, and I think Usman will smash him, and rightfully so. Now, in the main event, Jon Jones versus Anthony Smith. How fucking tough is Anthony Smith, okay? He could have taken the easy way out with that when Jon Jones kneed him when his hand was on the ground, but he did not. And let me just go over this quick. Because I think this is important to know. In the unified rules, your hand being on the ground is not you considered a grounded opponent. Meaning that if you have one hand on the ground, your knees are not on the floor, you are a standing opponent, and you are allowed to knee someone in the face in that position. So, Jon Jones, it wasn't like Jon was intentionally doing it. It's just so fucking confusing because not every commission has adopted the unified rules. New York adopted those rules. California did. But Nevada, which has some of the biggest fights in the world, has not adopted those rules. So they got to get their shit together. Because that really could have costed Jon Jones the fight if Anthony Smith decided to say that he was unable to fight. Big balls on Anthony Smith for sure for sticking in that. And listen, Jon Jones dominated this fight. I think that Jon really could have done more in this fight, in my opinion. But you know what? Anthony Smith's a super tough guy, and I think he really cemented himself in that top 5 in that light heavyweight division. We really didn't know, but now we really do know that he belongs in the light heavyweight division. He's a top 5 fighter there. He did look good. He did almost land a really significant head kick on Jon Jones, but Jon Jones pieced him up with the boxing. I mean, those kicks that he used to control range, those inside low kicks, I mean, he just throws it so hard, and those spinning techniques he likes to throw, they were landed effective in this fight. Jon Jones is just so well-rounded and so good everywhere, and one of the best things about Jon Jones is he makes you fight his game, and it's just really hard to implement your game plan on a guy like Jon Jones. And also, there was a 9-inch reach advantage on Jones's part, so that's why he's really able to implement a lot of these kicks and is able to control the range as well as he does. Really a great performance from both of them. Jon Jones even said after the fight he wasn't 100% on, and I believe that. It's really hard to be on 100% of the time when you're a professional fighter, especially in the UFC. But yeah, still a big win for Jon Jones. I think he's going to stay at light heavyweight for a while and see what plays out. DC, Dana White was saying, we'll fight Brock Lesnar next if Brock Lesnar calls and they make that happen. So we'll see what happens there. But Jon Jones is staying at light heavyweight. I think the fight they're trying to make now is Thiago Santos, who actually knocked out Anthony Smith right before he moved up to light heavyweight, versus Jon Jones. That'll be a good fight. The real threat there is just Thiago Santos' power. But Jon's been able to deal with power strikers before, super explosive guys. The only one we didn't see him get to fight against, and he was probably the most explosive fighter in the UFC, was against Anthony Johnson. So Thiago Santos is a real threat to anyone. If he's able to connect on one of those hands, you're in some shit. But John Jones is too good. I think he's going to be able to control the distance really well in that fight. And I think he'll pick him apart slowly, just like he did to Anthony Smith. And John Jones is grappling. He made Anthony Smith look like a little kid. He had him almost curled up into a corner in fetal position when he had his back, and when he had the front headlock. It's just John Jones' top pressure is phenomenal, too. I think it's highly underrated, his top pressure. I'd put him in the top 5 of the UFC, I'd say, for fighters that have the best top pressure in the UFC. He really is an animal overall. But what a great card UFC 235 was. Pissed I missed most of it, but I made up for a lot of it watching it on ESPN, all the prelims, and watching some of the fights on my phone, searching through wherever I could to try to find these fights. So hope you guys listen to this, and I hope you guys tune in again. Read SPN on Instagram right there. Follow the movement. Thank you for showing support. Thank you guys, and have a nice day.